Hey guys, welcome back to The Readers. I hope you are having an amazing day. Let's get right into the stories. The first one is a pro-revenge story. I live in Asia and just purchased a new house in August 2025. The previous owners were family friends who needed cash urgently and hadn't been living in my country for nearly 3 years. So I got it for a great price in the middle of the capital city. The sale was finalized at the beginning of October and I moved in right after. The house was definitely a fixer-upper, as the previous owners had left mid-renovation and the main door was locked with just a padlock, not even a proper door lock. The house had no gate, meaning anyone could just walk right on in. The first day I moved in, someone's motorcycle was parked in the garage. I just parked it on the road on the same day I had a gate installed. An angry man was knocking on my gate later, and I didn't bother answering, but through my window I could see him giving up and taking the motorcycle after 15 minutes. "Who does this guy think he is?" I heard him mutter as he walked away. This place has been empty for years. So already I wasn't digging the neighborhood, but I didn't have any incidents after that, aside from people not knowing that this was no longer an abandoned house, so my gate was blocked more often than not, but a no parking sign on my gate fixed that issue. Last week, I was having a shower in my bathroom and I noticed my water pressure was lower than usual. I also heard my next-door neighbor's water pump going. Now, this neighbor, Mr. Parker, an old guy in his 70s, lived in a 3-storied house, the first being the lowest and the one he lived in. The other 2 floors were rented out to tenants. This guy wasn't happy about the house being sold and voiced many concerns to my friends, the previous owners. He was super angry about it, and my friends did warn me, but I'm a 6 feet guy with 3 dogs. No way he was doing anything, and yep, he didn't. "Watch out for Mr. Parker," my friend Raj had told me. He kept complaining about potential new neighbors and tried to convince us not to sell. "Don't worry about it," I'd replied. "I can handle a grumpy old man." So with this living situation, a water pump is needed to pump water to the tanks on the roof, since the public supplies pressure is not enough to get it up 3 stories. Now, I heard the water pump going and immediately was suspicious. Sure, coincidences exist, but it wouldn't hurt to check it out. I waited till his pump turned off and then turned on different taps in the house. Sure enough, the pressure was back to normal. This made me even more suspicious, but if he was stealing water, it also made sense. The water bills had been going up over the years this house wasn't lived in, but the house also had some water leaks, so it was chalked up to that, even if the bills were too high to be caused just by leaks. Now it was starting to make sense. At some point in the last 3 years, this old miser thought he'd save the cost of paying for water and waltzed into the property and started siphoning water from my lines. I couldn't find exactly where he was siphoning water from, but after checking my pressure multiple times, I was pretty sure. So I sat on it for a few days thinking if I should confront him, go the legal path, or just let it be. Now, water in my country is very cheap. My total bill, even with washing 3 animals, a car every week, and watering my garden only cost like $5 per month, even with the neighbor also stealing some of it. But it wasn't about how much I was paying or who was paying for it. It's about entitled old people who think that they're deserving of using other people's resources without paying for it and then getting away with it. It didn't sit right with me, and I really wanted to teach him a lesson. What I did was really simple. I just turned off my water from the mains. I wouldn't have to break into his property, nor would I be breaking any laws. It was the best way of getting back at him without needing to even lift a muscle. So on Monday, just 4 days ago, I waited till the pump flicked on and turned off the supply. Now, the way household tanks work in my country is that there's a ball valve in the tank which detects the level of water and turns on the pump. If the level doesn't increase, the valve stays open, which electronically sends a signal to the pump to stay on until the level gets to a point at which the valve closes and also shuts off the pump. "Let's see how you like this, Mr. Parker," I muttered to myself as I turned the valve. However, the level wasn't increasing, and anyone knows that starving a pump of water isn't a good idea. This way, my expectation was that I'd burn out his pump and cause issues with his tenants. What I didn't account for is that his pump running constantly would mess up the fuses by constantly drawing power overnight and absolutely destroy his wiring. If he had decided to upgrade his household wiring to a more modern standard, this would have been prevented. This house clearly still had early 2000s era wiring. At around 3 a.m., I heard all residents in the house waking up and talking in hushed voices about why just their house in the neighborhood didn't have power or water. I found out about the power part because the tenants devolved into shouting at their landlord. "This is the 3rd time this month, Mr. Parker," a woman's voice yelled. "We cannot live like this." "I don't understand what happened," Mr. Parker replied defensively. "The power was working fine yesterday." "Well, it's not working now, and I have an important Zoom meeting in the morning," a man's voice chimed in. This is unacceptable. Our tenant protection laws are very important, and power and water are classed as essential even on a state level. Cutting those services are grounds for lawsuits unless due to weather or some other unavoidable reason. In this case, the landlord is responsible for keeping the house wiring up to date and in good condition, alongside the supply of water. So the tenants were not happy, and one of them, Miss Lynn, immediately moved out 2 days later when it was informed that water and power would not be returning the very same day this happened. "I've had enough, Mr. Parker," I overheard Miss Lynn saying as she carried boxes to a waiting taxi. "I'm not paying rent for a place without basic utilities. You'll be hearing from my lawyer about my deposit." Both tenants in the 2 floors lodged a complaint with the police, and if a person is in clear breach of laws, the police have the authority to fine or penalize the person without a court judgment. It can be challenged in court if the person thinks that they were unfairly penalized, but they still have to pay the fines and will only be refunded if and when the court finds the fines unlawful. So now, Mr. Parker lost both tenants and has to pay a fine of $500, which is a lot of money in our country. He also has to refund the security deposits of both tenants and cannot rent out until both issues are fixed, which will cost him more money. As of right now, he's moving out on Sunday to his daughter's place since he cannot afford to live alone. The tenants were his only source of income, and he's a retired mechanic, so he has no other income. He did find out why the motor kept drawing power, overloaded the wiring, and burned out. He came by to my gate and asked me if I turned off my water. "Excuse me," he said, his voice strained but trying to remain polite. "Did you by any chance turn off your water main recently?" I put on my most innocent face. "Oh yeah, my tank had a new leak on a pipe and I turned it off till the next day until the plumber came by to fix the issue." The look on his face was priceless. He kept a straight one, but I just knew he was holding back. He just said, "Oh, I see," and went back inside. Not sure if he knows I know, but I don't care because he can't do anything. "Is everything all right, Mr. Parker?" I called after him with mock concern. Yes, everything is fine," he replied without turning around, his shoulders slumped in defeat. "I'm getting a plumber down next week to correct my plumbing and remove any pipes that leave my property. So I got rid of my water issue and a neighbor who could potentially be a pain in the ass by simply flicking a tap off. 2 birds, 1 stone, I'd say. The next one is an entitled people story. I never thought I'd be dealing with property disputes when I bought my house 15 years ago. The place came with 3 acres of mostly wooded land in a quiet rural area, and I'd been living peacefully ever since. That all changed when my new neighbor moved in next door. The house next to mine had been empty for almost 2 years after the previous owner passed away. It was a smaller property, maybe 1.5 acres, with a modest ranch-style house that had seen better days. When I saw the moving trucks pull up one morning, I was actually excited to finally have neighbors again. That excitement lasted exactly 1 week. My new neighbor was the type of person who seemed to think the world revolved around her personal convenience. She started small, complaining that my dog barked too much when he was outside, even though he rarely made noise and was always inside by 8 p.m. Then she moved on to my garden, saying the smell of my compost pile was offensive. I tried to be neighborly and moved it further from the property line, but nothing seemed to satisfy her. The real problem started about a month after she moved in. I was working in my backyard, clearing some fallen branches after a storm, when she marched over to my property line with a determined look on her face. "Excuse me," she called out, "but you need to stop doing yard work on my land." I looked around confused. I was clearly on my own property, at least 20 feet from what I knew was the boundary line. "I'm sorry, but this is my property. The line runs along that row of oak trees over there." She shook her head vigorously. No. I had someone look at the property records, and this entire section belongs to me. You've been trespassing." I tried to stay calm and explained that I'd been living here for 15 years and was very familiar with my property boundaries. I even offered to show her the survey I'd had done when I bought the place, but she wasn't interested in hearing any of it. "I don't care what some old paperwork says," she declared. "I know what I know, and this land is mine. You need to stop using it immediately." Over the next few weeks, things escalated quickly. She started putting up orange plastic fencing along what she claimed was the real property line, which happened to cut through my vegetable garden, my fire pit area, and even included part of my driveway. When I removed the fencing, she called the police and tried to file a complaint for destruction of property. The officer who responded was actually pretty reasonable. He looked at the situation and basically told us it was a civil matter that would need to be resolved through proper channels. But my neighbor wasn't satisfied with that answer. That's when she made the demand that would ultimately lead to her downfall. She showed up at my door one evening with a thick folder of papers and an attitude that suggested she thought she was about to win some grand victory. "I've done my research," she announced, "and I'm prepared to take this to court, but I'm willing to give you one chance to avoid legal action." I asked her what she was talking about, and that's when she laid out her ridiculous demand. "I want you to provide me with complete documentation proving your ownership of every square inch of your property. Not just some basic deed. I want surveys, soil tests, historical records, mineral rights documentation, water rights, easement information, everything. I want it all professionally verified and notarized. You have 30 days." She continued, "If you can't provide absolute proof that you own every bit of land you claim, then I'm taking you to court for trespassing and property theft, and when I win, I expect you to compensate me for 15 years of illegal land use." I stared at her for a moment, trying to process the sheer audacity of what she was demanding. She wanted me to spend thousands of dollars on comprehensive property documentation just to prove what I already knew, that I owned my own house and land. "And if I do provide all this documentation?" I asked. "Then I'll consider dropping the matter," she said smugly, "but only if everything checks out perfectly. One missing form, one inconsistency, and we're going to court." That's when I realized she just handed me the perfect opportunity for malicious compliance. She wanted complete documentation? Fine. I'd give her exactly what she asked for. The next morning, I started making phone calls. I contacted the most expensive property law firm in the county and explained the situation. The attorney I spoke with was actually amused by the whole thing and agreed to take on the case. I also hired a professional surveying company, not just for a basic boundary survey, but for the most comprehensive property analysis they offered. But I didn't stop there. Since my neighbor wanted everything, I decided to give her everything. I hired a genealogist to trace the complete chain of ownership for my property going back to the original land grants. I commissioned soil composition tests, groundwater analysis, and even had an environmental assessment done to check for any potential contamination or protected species habitats. I contacted the County Historical Society to research any historical significance of the land. I had a geologist examine the property for mineral deposits. I even hired a specialist to verify that there were no ancient burial grounds or archaeological sites that might affect property rights. The process took about 3 weeks and cost me nearly $12,000, but I was determined to give my neighbor exactly what she'd demanded. Every test was professionally conducted, every document was properly notarized, and everything was compiled into a comprehensive report that ended up being over 200 pages long. But here's where things got interesting. During all this research and surveying, some important facts came to light. The professional survey I commissioned was incredibly detailed, using GPS technology and referencing multiple historical markers. When the surveyor finished his work, he came to me with some interesting news. Not only were my property boundaries exactly where I thought they were, but my neighbor had actually been encroaching on my land. That orange fencing she'd put up, it was about 15 feet onto my property. Her garden shed, which she'd installed shortly after moving in, was sitting entirely on my land. Even more problematic for her, the gravel driveway extension she'd added was using a section of my property to access her backyard. But the real bombshell came from the title research. The genealogist I'd hired discovered that my neighbor's property had a historical easement that had never been properly resolved. Back in the 1940s, the original owner of her land had granted a utility easement to the county that was supposed to expire after 20 years, but had language that could be interpreted as extending indefinitely under certain circumstances. More importantly, the research revealed that there was an old property dispute from the 1960s that had never been fully resolved. The previous owners of her property had tried to claim additional land during a boundary dispute, but the case had been settled with a specific legal description that actually reduced their property size by about a quarter acre. The attorney explained that while this old case didn't necessarily affect current ownership, it did establish legal precedent for the exact boundary lines that my neighbor was now violating with her encroachments. When the 30 days were up, I invited my neighbor over to review the documentation she'd demanded. I had everything laid out on my dining room table: soil tests, surveys, historical records, title documentation, environmental reports, the works. Each document was properly notarized and professionally bound. She walked in with such confidence, clearly expecting to find some flaw she could use against me. I handed her the executive summary first, which detailed every aspect of my property ownership and included a map showing the precise boundaries. Her face started to change as she read through the survey results. The color drained from her cheeks when she got to the section about encroachments and easement violations. By the time she reached the historical boundary documentation, she was visibly shaking. "This can't be right," she stammered. "These boundaries would mean that my shed is on your property." I nodded calmly. "That's exactly what it means. Along with your driveway extension and about 15 feet of what you thought was your backyard. You've been trespassing on my land since you moved in." The irony was beautiful. She demanded absolute proof of my property ownership, and in providing exactly what she asked for, I documented her own violations of property law. But I wasn't done yet. Remember, she'd threatened to take me to court and demand compensation for 15 years of illegal land use. I decided to follow her example. I had my attorney draft a formal cease and desist letter demanding that she remove all encroachments from my property within 15 days. The letter also included a bill for land use fees, calculated at fair market rental value for the approximately 2,400 square feet of my property she'd been using without permission. The bill came to just over $3,000 for the 2 months she'd been encroaching, plus legal fees and surveying costs. The letter made it clear that if she didn't comply, I'd be taking her to court for trespassing and property theft, using her own words against her. My neighbor tried to fight it at first. She hired her own attorney and attempted to challenge the survey results. But when her lawyer saw the comprehensive documentation I'd assembled, he advised her to settle quickly. Apparently, my property research was so thorough that it would be nearly impossible to challenge in court. She also discovered that the historical easement issue could potentially affect her property value and future development rights. The old boundary dispute documentation I'd uncovered suggested that she might not actually own as much land as she thought she did, and resolving that question would require expensive legal research on her part. Faced with mounting legal costs and the clear evidence that she was in the wrong, my neighbor backed down completely. She moved her shed, removed the driveway extension, and paid me a settlement that covered my legal and surveying costs, plus additional compensation for land use. The whole experience cost her nearly $8,000, not including the money she spent on her own attorney, all because she demanded that I prove something I already knew to be true. The best part? She moved out about 6 months later. Apparently, the stress of the property dispute and the potential easement issues made her decide the house wasn't worth the trouble. The new neighbors who moved in are wonderful, quiet, respectful, and they actually checked their property boundaries before doing any yard work. Looking back, I almost have to thank my former neighbor for her ridiculous demand. By insisting that I provide comprehensive proof of my property ownership, she forced me to get the most detailed property documentation possible. Now I have absolute certainty about every aspect of my land, complete with professional surveys and historical research that would cost a fortune to replicate. And the irony of her situation was perfect. She'd moved in assuming she could bully me into giving up land that was rightfully mine, but her own demand for documentation became the very tool that proved her wrong and cost her thousands of dollars. Sometimes the best way to deal with unreasonable people is to give them exactly what they ask for. The next one is a petty revenge story. Drag me another country to fix your problems, then try to blame me for them? Get left high and dry. This is unfolding basically in real time, but we're near the end of the story now. This story is a bit technical in nature, but I've tried to spare as many details as possible. My company does industrial software globally, which involves multiple modules interacting with physical processes. Projects often involve installation and testing locally, but my team's part is able to be deployed and tested about 90% remotely. There was one project in North America where my team's software was deployed months ago, and we've only had to deal with fairly minor bugs since then. However, the project overall is running hella late and the local team is struggling hard. So 3 weeks ago, they asked me to fly out about halfway across the world to help fix it while I finish off that last 10%. I arrive and find that the other key software module in the system barely works, but the people on site who are supposed to be working on it instead of knuckling down and fixing it have basically been blaming everything else. Talking to the other team members, these guys has me spent the past month blaming the mechanical and electrical designers, fitters, and technicians, often without real basis. When I arrive, they seem happy that I'm here to help fix things, but about a week later, shocked to nobody, they start trying to blame me for their problems as well. I tolerate this for about a week, explaining to them how the system should work. I was a key designer. Collecting logs and evidence of the problems and performing root cause analyses to help them locate the problem with their code. It doesn't stop them from trying, but it keeps my hands clean and makes progress to me going home. Then last Friday, I get a baffling email from the group of them. Apparently, they had met at a time where the project manager knew I was not available and constructed an elaborate theory about how the software I was responsible for was doing the wrong thing and convinced the PM, who is non-technical, into backing them. In a call to discuss it, I was told by the PM that I was responsible for collaborating with the team to fix this issue, which had resulted in delays to project milestones. I try to explain my side but get shouted down on the call. I experience a very powerful moment of clarity about what is happening and immediately change my strategy. That shift, I explain again that I consider the issue to be unlikely and demand to see hard evidence backing this claim. They cannot produce anything beyond the data at this breakpoint isn't what it should be, which I explain is not conclusive as it could still be the fault of their code. I then spend half the shift trying to replicate the problem and capturing network traffic logs between the two systems, the interface where these systems interact, but no matter how hard I try, I cannot replicate it. Instead of delivering it just to them as I had been, I copy in my management back home all the way to the top, along with a paper trail showing how I had been blindsided, demanded to fix a problem that could not be traced to my area of responsibility, all without evidence, and documented names and exactly how much time had been wasted. It turns out I'm not alone. Some privately reach out to me asking for more details, explaining that they are seeing a similar thing unfolding on a different project run by members of the same team. I happily oblige. In the middle of the shift, I explain this in clear terms to them and they lose their crap, denying what they had done, backtracking, trying to blame me some more. One looked like they might start crying. The next day, I send a formal letter to HR back home, withdrawing my consent to be there with all the legalese referencing my employment agreement and specific legal statutes and explaining that among other reasons, this had become an unsafe and uncollaborative work environment. They agree without any fuss, and I start planning to return. The PM loses their crap and almost begs me to stay because it means that I will not be present for the client sign-off, and there were still things to be fixed, and the likelihood of this local team fixing them themselves is next to zero. I leave tomorrow and testing starts the following day. Normally this would be unfathomable, but at this point I have enough evidence that I'm basically untouchable. I am both impressed and disgusted by the audacity of this team, but they ducked with the wrong person and just landed themselves an even bigger world of pain. The next one is an entitled people story. It's a baffling phenomenon, the prevalence of power-hungry homeowner association presidents in South Africa. It seems as though every neighborhood has its fair share of crazed individuals who revel in the authority bestowed upon them. But let me rewind a bit and provide some context. I've never been a fan of homeowners associations. To me, their purpose is dubious at best. My neighborhood was perfectly fine without one, and yet, fate had decided that we needed one. Our homeowner association was led by a corrupt individual, a despicable creature who seemed more interested in lining his pockets than improving the community. Resolutely, I chose not to join the homeowner association. Their president, however, took my decision as a personal affront, and embarked on a relentless campaign to coerce me into submission. Whenever I stepped outside, he conveniently materialized to inundate me with persuasive speeches extolling the virtues of the homeowner association. His persistent attempts to wear me down were futile. Letters, phone calls, and unwelcome visits bombarded me ceaselessly. It was apparent that this man had a master plan to hound me until I yielded and joined the homeowner association. But I was not about to squander my hard-earned money, enabling him to indulge his avarice. I would rather spend it on frivolous indulgences than surrender it to the man who had become a perpetual thorn in my side. Realizing that his previous tactics had failed, the president resolved to take more extreme measures. And so, one fateful evening, as I sat down to dinner, the doorbell rang persistently. Annoyed, but sensing the possibility of an emergency, I answered the door, only to come face to face with none other than the homeowner association president himself, brandishing a menacing shotgun. Fear coursed through my veins as he barked orders, demanding that I vacate my own property. I complied, retreating to the street, feeling helpless and violated. It was then that he laid down his ultimatum: join the homeowner association or face his wrath. The audacity of his demand was chilling, but I dared not question his resolve. I drove away, vowing to return sooner than he expected. Seeking solace and support, I sought refuge with a friend who, understanding the gravity of the situation, reluctantly provided me with a firearm. While I knew it was unorthodox and risky, I couldn't bear the thought of being defenseless. I harbored no intention of causing harm, merely a desire to protect myself if the need arose. With no other viable options and my legal rights on my side, I returned to reclaim my home. Much to my dismay, it appeared that the homeowner association president had been surveilling my property. No sooner had I stepped foot inside than he materialized, his rage palpable. Aiming his shotgun at my face, he threatened me once again. My hand trembled as I tightened my grip on the handgun, the line between life and death growing thin. In that moment of desperation, I fired a shot, aiming for his leg. It was a desperate plea to deter him, a plea that I'd hoped would only graze him or strike the ground. Yet fate had other plans. He screamed in agony, and the sound of sirens pierced the air as the police and ambulance arrived swiftly. With his own action sealed his fate. Unable to concoct a believable story of innocence, he confessed to his despicable motives. Admitting to threatening me due to my non-compliance with the homeowner association, he claimed he never intended to harm me. But his confession did little to erase the terror he had inflicted upon me. While I did face some legal repercussions for my possession of an unauthorized firearm, the punishment was minimal, a mere warning and a nominal fine. The incident left me with an aversion to firearms, witnessing firsthand the catastrophic consequences they can cause. Meanwhile, the corrupt homeowner association president faced more severe consequences. An investigation into his finances revealed the extent of his embezzlement, a crime that rightfully warranted punishment. He was ordered to repay the misappropriated funds, ensuring their redirection toward genuinely benefiting the community. Furthermore, he was promptly removed from his position of authority, and the entire episode served as a cautionary tale, casting doubt upon the integrity of homeowner associations. In a twist of poetic justice, a few weeks later, a mighty storm ravaged the neighborhood, reducing the former president's house to ruins. It felt as though a divine hand had intervened, demonstrating that wrongdoing ultimately begets retribution. Inspired by this fortuitous turn of events, we decided to utilize the funds recovered from the president's misdeeds to create a community garden on what was once his property. The next one is a pro-revenge story. So a friend and I moved into this newly renovated apartment in Brooklyn. It's nice enough, but just about every one of the 14 units has some sort of weird problem. One unit had the hot and cold water mixed up, flush a few times and get a heated toilet. One unit had none of the outlets grounded, and one unit had gaps around the windows. The problem in our unit was a leak in the air conditioner lines. The leak was probably at the roof, but we ended up with no AC. We called them, and it took a month to get someone. He refilled the lines, and a week later the problem came back. We spent the summer getting the system topped up every week. At the end of the summer, they decided that our repairs and all of the neighbors were getting too expensive. So they sent us bills. Our bill was in the tens of thousands of dollars. Recharging that system weekly must have been expensive. They also started trying to charge every unit for any infraction, like $100 for every unit for a single scrap of paper found in a hall. The tenants all got together to have a little meeting. It turns out that they never got a certificate of occupancy for the building. The city had it on the books as a furniture warehouse. So collectively, we all just stopped paying them. Rent, fines, fees, nothing. We retained a lawyer and just lived there. The company tried to get us out by cutting lighting and other services. We contacted the lawyer, the company would get fined, and we'd get our lights back. They tried to change the main lock once, but we let the locksmith know what was going on, so he stopped. They didn't try it a second time. The first floor of the building was an off-track betting parlor. They were particularly noisy and obnoxious, so one resident called the health department over a moldy loaf of bread we found in the basement. One of my best memories was watching a bunch of guys in hazmat suits clear out the betting parlor so they could run tests. Eventually, they tried to get the certificates, but to do that, they needed to do inspections with the drywall removed. They tried to do it while we lived there, and the lawyer fought it for not being in a livable state. Finally, they realized they needed us out. If they got the certificate of occupancy while we were still there, we'd owe back rent. They took us to court to get evictions. The lawyer got everything pushed back as far as he could, but finally we went to city court. The lawyer pointed out that they were trying to evict 14 units, but you can't evict more than 10 at a time. The court ejected the case. I don't think their lawyer got a single word in, so now we have a county court date for an ejection instead of an eviction. Again, the lawyer pushed it out as much as he could, but eventually we went. The court agreed to eject us all, but saw the evidence of lighting and lock tampering. The court asked our lawyer what would be a reasonable time frame. The lawyer asked for 4 months. The judge gave us 6. Everyone stayed until the last month. At the end of it all, we got to live in a newly renovated apartment in a trendy area of Brooklyn for free for a little over a year. The next one is a petty revenge story. After 5 years of marriage and endless false promises, I finally get my personal revenge. My ex-husband, 32, and I, 33, got married in 2017 after 1 year of a long-distance relationship between the US and Germany. We sealed the deal, got married in the US, and he wanted me to live with him in the good old US of A because he didn't want to learn another language. To make things easier, he moved in with me in Germany for a job I helped him get, so we would have time to finalize my plans for emigration and immigration. Now my ex didn't even get started gathering all the required documents for himself to be my sponsor. Said and done, I had all the documents well sorted out, canceled all my contracts, sold my belongings, sent large parts of my things to the US, and said goodbye to my lovely home, friends, and family. Little did I know my ex-husband did not do a single bit of research, or even do his part for my immigration process, and I wasn't able to set foot on the plane that would bring me to my new home. Long story short, he left for the US without me, and I was homeless with a suitcase and 2 cats. He continued to lead me on with promises to come and get me. Meanwhile, he started a polyamorous affair. Later, he got involved with a 21-year-old young lady. I lived with my parents for a few months to get back on my feet, find a new apartment, and a new source of income. Now, I never went to German officials to get our marriage recognized in Germany, mostly because I didn't think it was necessary since we planned to live together in the US. But my laziness should prove to be useful later. Since he was with his new girlfriend, 21, I broke off the relationship. In the US, we still count as married, and focused on myself, regaining my independence, and rebuilding my life in my home country. I fell in love with an acquaintance, 31, I've known for 13 years, and we soon found that we have very similar goals in life, and the same ideals and wishes for a monogamous life. Meanwhile, I've been in contact with my ex to finally get him to start the divorce process in the US. Since the marriage was closed in the US, only a US citizen is able to petition for divorce at the district court. I didn't want my name to be further affiliated with him, and I also didn't see the reason why he should further profit from tax benefits. I made it clear that I didn't want this anymore and wanted to move on. Finally, he got the process started and forgot one single thing. I am not an American citizen. So everything that applies in the US when it comes to paperwork doesn't apply to me in Germany. It means serving me via email? Nope. Wanting me to sign something electronically? Nope. Not possible. All they would have to do is send me the notarized, signed, and translated paperwork via physical mail. But they don't. So I get email after email with pleas to get me to sign the US divorce papers electronically. With every email his lawyer sends me, his pay ramps up. Don't get me wrong, I certainly told the lawyer what he has to do in order to get me to sign a legally significant piece of paper, but I guess he doesn't know international laws. So at this point, my ex still sits on all of my belongings I asked him to give back, and since he doesn't do that, I'll keep collecting spam mails from his lawyer. That's my personal revenge for leading me on, using my hopeless romantic heart, and leaving me alone when things got tough. I don't count as married in Germany, and am currently expecting a little baby boy with my partner, and we are building a life together without false promises. The next one is an entitled people story. My aunt was one of 2 kids my grandparents had. My mother was the polar opposite of my aunt. She worked from the age of 12 in my grandfather's shop, never asked for anything, and eventually managed to start her own business. My aunt never held down a job until the age of 26, was constantly stealing from her parents, and was constantly in trouble. Despite this, my aunt was spoiled by my grandmother, and so were her kids. She had 3 kids from 3 different men, and her first husband was not one of them, if you know what I mean. It didn't matter what my aunt or her kids did, my grandmother would always jump to their defense. She never had time for my mom and her kids, unless it was to get something from us. The only reason my mom would visit her was because she loved my grandfather. My grandfather passed away in 2004, and a few months after, my nan decided to write up a new will. My mother and my aunt were both present for it when she signed it, so they knew what was in it. It made it so that when she passed away, her home would be sold and the money split 25% each to my mom and aunt, and the remaining 50% would go evenly to the grandkids. At the time, the home was worth more than £500,000, so it would be a nice little inheritance, but nothing life-changing. In 2010, my mom died after an accident and did not have a current will in place. As she no longer had her business and was renting a house, she didn't have anything of much monetary value. The only thing she was concerned about was what would be done at her funeral should she have passed away. But she had told me everything she wanted. The music, the flowers, the coffin color, and even what people were to wear at the funeral. She wanted people to wear bright, warm colors. So when she passed, my aunt and Nan took over all the arrangements and tried to undo all the things I had told them. The songs were going to be songs I knew Mom didn't like. The flowers were all the wrong colors, and they picked a hideous coffin. With the help of my siblings, we were able to change a few of the things back to what they were supposed to be. But the coffin couldn't be changed for some reason, and my Nan refused to let people come dressed as clowns, so it was all black. It was frustrating. After the funeral, my Nan had her will changed. My siblings and I were told by our aunt that she didn't have any involvement with the writing of the will, and our Nan told us that she changed it so that Mom's share would go to her kids instead. All good, we thought. After Mom passed away, my Nan just stopped talking about my mom. At first, we thought it was because she was still recovering from losing her daughter, but even 5 years after Mom passed, she still wouldn't talk about her. Even if you brought up a story about Mom, Nan would very obviously try to change the subject, usually about how hard my aunt and her crappy kids had it. And if you went to talk to her about your own problems, she would somehow bring it back to my aunt. I had suffered a mental breakdown after my mom's death, so you can imagine how much it hurt to hear, well, X has had it so much worse. In 2016, my Nan passed away. She had written down what she wanted to be done for her funeral, and it was basically all the same things she had picked out for my mom's funeral, even the music to be played. I don't know why she tried to have a dress rehearsal funeral using my mom as the stand-in, but it was obvious that's what she was trying to do. So after a couple of months, our siblings and I were waiting to hear about the will reading, and my aunt kept telling me, "Oh, it'll be another month before we can do the reading." I didn't mind. I wasn't fussed about the money, to be honest. But my oldest brother was hoping to use the money to pay for a honeymoon for him and his then-fiancée, and my younger brother was about to start uni, so it would be a hell of a help. Eventually, my dad bumped into the solicitor my grandmother had used to deal with her will, and asked what was happening. The solicitor let slip that the will had already been read and that it left everything to my aunt. When my dad questioned this, the solicitor told him that my aunt had been present when the will was written, despite promising that she had nothing to do with it. When confronted, my aunt initially tried to deny it, but eventually admitted to lying to all of us. She showed us the will, and it confirmed what we already knew. The house and all its contents were now my aunt's. This included my grandfather's war medals. He fought in the Second World War. When I told her that he had promised them to me before he died, she said, "Well, unless you have it in writing, you will have nothing in this house." Anyway, I already gave them to Clive. My heart sank. Clive, not his real name obviously, was her eldest son and the dictionary definition of a duck-up. He'd been in and out of prison for stealing and dealing drugs. I knew that the moment that prick got his hands on my grandfather's medals, they would have been sold off. We looked into taking her to court over the will, but everyone we spoke to said that we probably wouldn't get anything out of it. She immediately put the house up for sale at close to £750,000. She had pissed off too many people in our town, so she was going to sell the house and move closer to her daughter, who lives in a big city. An offer was made on the house, and she put down a deposit on a house near the big city. And I thought that was that. Here's where karma comes into play. The people who wanted my Nan's house had a survey done on the house to see if there were issues, and oh boy were there. Turns out that the land the house was built on was too soft for the type of house it was, and it was sinking. It had sunk about 2 cm in the 40-plus years my Nan and Granddad had lived there, but the sinking was accelerating to 1 cm per year. This meant that within the next 3 years, the house would need some serious work or be knocked down. The new value of the house? £60,000. The buyers immediately pulled out, having not even put down a deposit. She couldn't buy her new house, but still had to pay the deposit on it. And while this was happening, she let Clive move in with her into her house that she rented from the council. He wasn't allowed to live in any of the council houses because he had trashed every single one he'd ever been given. Someone reported this, and she was kicked out of her home. She was forced to move into my Nan's old home as she couldn't live anywhere else. So there she is, living in a crumbling house with her shithead son and her partner. She was stuck there for 2 years. Every time I saw her, she would try to start talking to me, and I would just ignore her and walk off. One time, as I was walking away, she screamed, "Your mother deserved to die for having a retard like you," in the middle of a busy street. Someone reported her to the police and she had an official warning from them and was ridiculed on Facebook. Every time I saw her after that, she looked more and more miserable. Eventually, she sold the house for something like £85,000 and moved in with her daughter in the big city. I lost contact with her and her kids after this. I thought karma had been issued. Oh, but karma still wasn't done with her. I bumped into one of her former friends and she told me what happened after she left our town. She moved into her daughter's home, let's call her Sue, but they only had a 3-bedroom house and 3 kids. My aunt and her partner had to live in the smallest room in the house, while my aunt looked for a job and a home to rent. Even with £85,000, she couldn't afford a home anywhere. After about a month, my aunt's partner ran off after emptying her account. She was left stranded in Sue's house, not contributing anything because all the money she makes goes into bingo. Eventually, Sue and my aunt got into a screaming match, and my aunt said something along the lines of, "I should have aborted you." Sue immediately kicked her out of her house. So again, there's my aunt, in a city where she knows nobody, no money, no home, and the last bridge she had is a smoldering wreck. The last anyone has heard, she was living in a caravan in the roughest part of the city, and she can no longer work because she's suffering from early onset arthritis and can no longer move her hands. I know I shouldn't find joy in something like this happening to another person, but it does bring me some peace as to what happened. The next one is an entitled parent's story. I went out on a Friday for a few hours with some friends, just some shopping and catching up. I hadn't seen some of them for the last 2 years due to COVID when we used to hang out almost every week. And I am leaving the country in a few weeks, so we took this opportunity to catch up and have a farewell party. I was out from late afternoon until about 9 or 10 p.m. when I got home. I took out my keys to unlock the gate, but they wouldn't fit. I tried to turn the key around, yes, like a USB, thinking it might fit the other way, but it still wouldn't go in. I called my mother, but she didn't pick up. I called my grandmother, who lives with me, but she was also out with her friends and wouldn't be home anytime soon. At this point, I was pissed. My mother had already burned a couple of my work pants the day before because I refused to wear a dress for work. My line of work requires me to move around a lot, so a dress or office skirt was not suitable for my environment. I shook the gate, but no one was home, so I picked the lock. After a few tries, I managed to open the metal gate. Luckily, the wooden door behind it was not locked. The neighbors did call the police, and of course I had to show them that I actually lived there and it was my legal address. I took some essentials and went to stay at my friend's house for the night because I couldn't lock the door back, and I didn't feel safe in the house without a locked door. The next day, my grandmother and I were invited to a pre-wedding event. It was kind of a meeting with the elders and an engagement party ceremony at a cafe. My mother only sent me the address and time for it. It was perfectly normal for my grandmother to be invited to these things via my mother. My grandmother doesn't know how to use a phone other than basic functions like calling. We showed up on time at the cafe and were escorted to a booth-type seat at the corner of the cafe. The booth already had a lady, mid-40s, 50s, and a guy. I assumed she was the mother and the guy was her son. The moment we sat down, the lady took out a calendar and notepads filled with lists of flower arrangements, color schemes, menus, dresses, hairstyles, etc. She introduced her son, who is 28 by the way, and told me what he does for a living, what he studies, and where. She thanked me for agreeing to marry him. I looked at her, then at her son, and then at the wedding planners and notes. It finally registered that this was for my wedding. My grandmother was pissed, to say the least. I apologized to the lady and said there must be some kind of misunderstanding between us, because I came to attend someone's engagement party, not plan my own. I added that I was only 20 this year. My grandmother then rudely asked why she thought that I would be marrying her son. The lady replied that her mother contacted her and said her daughter was looking for a partner and husband to settle down, so she, referring to me, could move out. My grandmother calmly said to the lady that she had been lied to, and that I was not going to be getting married anytime soon. She said her son seems nice, and hopes he finds someone who likes him to marry in the future, but it was not going to be me. We got up and left. When we got home, I found my things stuffed in a black plastic bag beside the door. My grandmother opened the door and told me to bring my stuff in. The moment I stepped through the door, my mother yelled that she put so much effort into finding a guy who would take a girl like me to marry, and that I should be grateful she didn't just marry me off to an older dude. She said I should be happy she found someone my age. She told me I embarrassed her because the mother called her and told her what she did was not okay, and she didn't even ask or inform me properly. My grandmother started to shout at my mother in Cantonese, which resulted in them being in a heated argument for almost 30 minutes, and my grandmother kicked my mother out. Of course, my mother moaned about and cried about it before leaving. The next one is an entitled People Story. I never anticipated the dramatic turn my life would take when I returned from visiting my family overseas. The trip was filled with precious moments spent with my aging parents, and as a responsible homeowner, I had made all necessary arrangements to ensure the security of my property during my absence. Little did I know that my neighbor's seemingly harmless favor of collecting my mail would lead to a shocking and intrusive discovery. Let me provide some context. I reside in a different country from my family, making occasional visits to spend cherished moments with them. Knowing the importance of these reunions and the limited time we had together, I wanted to avoid any regrets of neglecting my loved ones. Therefore, I entrusted my neighbor with the task of picking up my mail while I was away, a small favor that he gladly accepted. We had always maintained a cordial relationship, often sharing snacks and enjoying barbecues during the sweltering summer months by the pool I had built in my backyard. Now, I must address the incident that shattered our amicable rapport and drove me to scream at him, banishing him from my property forever. Having managed to secure a morning flight home, I promptly notified my neighbor, expecting his customary prompt reply. To my surprise, there was an uncharacteristic silence from his end, which struck me as peculiar given his constant attachment to his phone. Hours later, as the sun began its descent, a strange noise emanated from my backyard, alerting me to a presence I hadn't anticipated. Peering through the window, I was confronted with a bewildering sight that awakened a fiery mix of fury and disgust within me. My neighbor, alongside a group of friends, reveled in my pool, their nudity flaunted shamelessly. To make matters worse, my backyard furniture had become a makeshift lounge, littered with empty beer cans. Overwhelmed by a cocktail of anger and repulsion, I confronted my neighbor, who undoubtedly realized the gravity of his transgression. Yet, in a feeble attempt to justify his behavior, he shamelessly claimed that it was a mere gathering to beat the heat, akin to when he brought his children over for a quick dip. I vehemently rejected his flimsy comparison, highlighting the obvious disparity between his children's innocent swims and a horde of naked strangers defiling my sanctuary. As some of the guests began to comprehend the gravity of their intrusion and hastily departed, I surmised that my neighbor had misled them, falsely asserting that he had obtained my permission, or that I would remain oblivious to their escapade. Enraged, I confronted him once more, asserting my rights as the property owner and demanding that he never set foot on my premises again. Threatening to involve the police if necessary, I made it unequivocally clear that any trespassing would be met with swift retribution. Still reluctant to leave, my neighbor forced my hand, compelling me to resort to dousing him with a hose until he finally retreated from my property. The cleanup that followed was burdensome, but I preferred the arduous task over allowing him to linger on my premises for another second. As for my mail, I never retrieved it, confident that if anything truly important had arrived, the sender would have contacted me again. The loss of a few coupons seemed trivial compared to the invasion of my privacy. This incident shook my confidence in leaving my home unattended during future trips. Thankfully, I secured a backup plan for my next journey. A trusted friend agreed to house sit, and I compensated her accordingly, ensuring the refrigerator was stocked and she had access to all necessary amenities. Furthermore, I installed an additional surveillance camera in my backyard, a failsafe to catch any potential repeat offenders. Instructing my friend on how to contact the authorities should my neighbor attempt a similar audacious act, I armed her with the knowledge of accessing the footage. Part of me hoped that my neighbor would respect the boundaries and refrain from any further transgressions for the sake of his family. Yet another part of me yearned for justice to prevail, perhaps with the law intervening to demonstrate the severity of his actions. Moreover, I couldn't help but envision the uncomfortable conversation he would have to engage in with his wife and children, explaining why their access to my refreshing pool had been abruptly revoked. The next one is a pro-revenge story. A good friend of mine inherited his grandparents' house about 4 years ago. He decided to live there temporarily while he figured out what to do with the property. Since he grew up in that house, he didn't want to sell it. Less than a week after he moved in, he received a visit from a neighborhood committee. They introduced themselves as the 3 board members of the Homeowners Association and asked him to sign his membership papers. They were extremely nosy and rude. One of them even tried to enter his garage without asking. When my friend stopped him and asked where he wanted to go, the board member had the audacity to say, "I need to check your garage to ensure everything is in order. I have the right to do this every 2 weeks, and denying me access is an offense that will result in a fine." Fed up with their audacity, he kicked them out of the house. While doing so, one of the board members shoved some papers into his face and demanded that he sign them immediately. Those papers were supposed to be signed before moving in, and my friend had already been living there for a week. Once they were gone, he took a look at the papers. They were ridiculous, granting the Homeowners Association unreasonable rights. For example, the Homeowners Association had the right to visit your home every 2 weeks, inspecting the garage to ensure it wasn't used for storage, and checking for gasoline or gas containers. They required the lawn to be mowed every week, and demanded snow to be shoveled every 2 hours during snowfall, starting at 5 o'clock in the morning. They also prohibited parking more than 1 car on the property, except inside the garage, and had numerous other unreasonable rules. A few days later, the board members returned and asked why he hadn't signed the papers yet. They also wanted to check the garage again. This time, he didn't allow them entry and made it clear that he would never become a member of their club. To them, this meant war. Within a week, they sent him fines totaling over $1,000, with several fines specifically for denying them access to his home, each worth $250. However, my friend didn't take them seriously and used their letters as kindling for his grill. Then came the day when they went way too far. He returned home and found one of the board members had broken into his garage, standing inside and writing things down on a notepad. But that wasn't the worst part. They were in the process of taking down his 2 magnificent oak trees in front of the house. Those trees had been planted by his great-grandparents when they were newlyweds and moved into the house. The Homeowners Association had called in a professional crew for this purpose. One of the trees was already severely damaged, reduced to just a stump. They had just begun working on the other one. He couldn't contain his anger. He ordered the tree crew to stop immediately and explained to them that he was the owner, and what they were doing was highly illegal. They had no idea because the board member claimed the trees violated the rules, alleging that too many leaves from the trees fell into the neighbor's garden. My friend informed them that it wasn't a legal reason to cut down the trees, but the board member insisted that my friend had given his consent because the trees violated the Homeowners Association's rules. Later, my friend looked it up and discovered that they actually had a bylaw stating that if a garden produced more than one 40-liter sack of leaves within 2 weeks, the garden owner had to remove the offending trees within 2 weeks. He informed them that he would overlook their trespassing if they agreed to be witnesses in court. Then he called the police on the board members for trespassing and breaking and entering. They had used bolt cutters to gain access to the garage, which he had always kept secured with a large bike lock after their previous attempts to break in. The legal process must have been glorious. Not only did they have to reimburse him for the lock and the tree, which was worth a significant amount, over $50,000 if I remember correctly, but they also had to pay damages for the second tree. He had a professional arborist tend to it to ensure proper healing, which alone cost over $1,000. However, these idiots actually believed the trial would be unfair and tried to fight it, which likely cost them an additional $10,000 to $15,000 in legal fees and court costs. In total, this trial must have cost them over $120,000. Afterwards, my friend went to another civil court and sued them for emotional damages. He emphasized how much those trees meant to him, planted by his great-grandparents with seeds from their home country. He painted a vivid picture and also expressed feeling threatened by the Homeowners Association, making it difficult for him to sleep as he constantly feared their attempts to access his house. The court bought his arguments and awarded him $500,000, in addition to the costs of a state-of-the-art alarm system to help him feel safe in his own home once again. In total, he cost the Homeowners Association nearly $750,000. They were forced to file for bankruptcy, and an individual was appointed to audit their finances so that my friend could recover his money. The best part is yet to come. The mediator discovered that these three individuals had been defrauding the homeowners association for over 10 years, using fines as a means to supplement their income. All three had to sell their houses to pay my friend. Now, he is one of the most popular residents, constantly receiving invitations for barbecues and other events. You see, most people never wanted the homeowners association in the first place. However, the board members practically coerced them into signing the contract, claiming it was not optional. They threatened a $500 fine for failing to sign before moving in. Out of over 50 members, only 6 actually wanted the homeowners association. People suspect that those 6 members got a share of the action as a reward for spying on their neighbors and reporting violations. The next one is a petty revenge story. My parents rent a house on a 1/4 acre of land. The land with rows of grapes is not being rented to my parents, but the landlord lets us pick them and juice them every year. The only access to the grapes is through the land my parents rent. Before my parents moved in, this old lady, Maureen, used to pick the grapes with her family and juice them. As a side note, Maureen has her own grapes, but she likes to use our landlord's grapes too because previous tenants did not. Every year it's a battle to make Maureen wait to pick grapes so we can pick a share. The landlord has been clear that we get first dibs on the grapes because we're his actual tenants. We always leave her at least a row, 1 of 4. Every year she tries to be a sneaky little person and get the grapes, but this year was the worst. My mom told Maureen that she was going to pick the grapes this weekend. Well, this weekend came and went without being able to pick grapes. My mom's helper crew got sick. My dad was recovering from major surgery, and she couldn't find the time or energy. Maureen's crotchety old self calls to inform my mom that she is coming tomorrow to pick all the grapes we didn't. My mom asked her to please wait a few more days as her husband, my dad, has cancer and her helpers were sick. Maureen's response: "That's too bad. You had your chance. My family is coming tomorrow and we are picking the grapes." Of course, my poor mom loses it at this point and begins screaming, "Shame on you, Maureen, you call yourself a Christian." Maureen continues telling her she had her chance. So my mom came in and told me this story. I said, "Absolutely not. We are staying up as late as needed to pick every single grape off the vines. Every single one. We both called as many friends as we could. The troops are being gathered. We now have about 10 people to help us pick the grapes. We will pick every single grape so that when Maureen and her family show up, there will not be one little fruit left on the vine. All-nighter for the grapes. Update. Oh my wow. Okay, well, I love how many of you would help pick grapes. It makes me feel bad about the fact that the update isn't super satisfying. Maureen called my mom last night, an hour or so into picking, to apologize and said we could have all the grapes. My mom, being a much better person than I am, told her she can still have a row or two because we didn't need all the grapes. But Maureen kept saying no, and that she won't come by at all. Ironically, it almost sounded like she was throwing a fit about it. Like, we're being nice and still letting you come. So we did pick grapes, but not everything. We still hate Maureen. Apparently she's 92 and she believes she will live forever because of her homemade grape juice. So that's one reason she's so crazy about this whole thing. Maybe she will live forever, but that would be unfortunate because she's an a-hole. The next one is an entitled people story. Not long ago, I posted about how my brother went out of his way to follow me when I tried to go camping alone. Him and that crazy vehicle he calls the mini ram that he made by cutting up a minivan and adding all sorts of other mods. My brother has stolen beer from me before on previous camping trips because he and his friends always drink too much and never buy enough. And when he followed me to my camping spot with his own camper a couple of weeks prior, he tried to steal a 6-pack from my fridge and acted like a big baby when I made him give it back. So I thought up this little gem of an idea. But it was no easy feat as my brother will drink just about any beer, so long as it gets him drunk. To try and find a beer that was truly nasty, I started asking around and buying different brands. After a couple of weeks, I hit pay dirt. I won't say the brand name of the beer, but it was bad. There was so much hop to the flavor that it made me shudder every time I took a swig. I could barely finish one bottle without puking because it made me gag so much. So this stuff was perfect. Also, I know some people really like that kind of overly hoppy beer. I'm not trying to offend, but to me it was just horrid. I started openly talking about going camping again in my favorite area, and getting my friends to join in. My brother easily got wind of this and decided he wanted to go camping too. He showed up with his mini ram and camper about 2 hours after I'd gotten to the campsite. Only this time he didn't try to park next to me, and instead went to the next spot about 100 yards further down the road. My friends and I partied it up in our own way, played music, danced like idiots around a fire, played stupid games, all the usual. And knowing my brother, he and his friends would run out of beer at some point and try to mooch off us because they have no concept of drinking in moderation. They didn't bother us on Friday night, but on Saturday night around 1 or 2 a.m., my brother hobbled over asking for beer. We all just ignored him like he wasn't there, which made him get an attitude. One of my friends brought his big cooler and was keeping all our good beer and food in it, and we kept the cooler near us or locked in my truck at all times. Inside my camper, I left 2 full 6-packs of that horrid beer in the mini fridge. My brother just grabbed them and walked away. He acted like he was being sneaky, but seeing a drunk man act like he was invisible was just hilarious. About a half hour later, my brother came hobbling back and looking sick. He started demanding to know what was in the beer I bought. I started asking him what he meant because I didn't give him any beer. He looked flustered for a moment and then finally just said he took some beer from my camper. I asked if it was the brew, and he said yes. I laughed and said that stuff was crap, and he could have it. I even pulled out another 6-pack that was minus the one I drank when I tested the beer and tried to hand it to him. He looked like he wanted to throw up at the sight of it and left. Then, just to be extra petty, my friends and I snuck over to his campsite after a little while and left the remaining 6-pack on top of his cooler. He and his friends were all wasted and actually still drinking the nasty beers I tricked them into stealing, and their faces all showed how bad it was. Every time one of them took a swig, it was followed by RBF, but they were so drunk that they probably wouldn't even notice there was more of that same beer. My friends and I watched from nearby as they kept drinking and making sour faces. My brother eventually puked on himself and then ran into the river to get the vomit off himself. He threw up some more in the water. It wasn't a pretty sight. Even though we could barely see him in the dark, we could still hear him. He repeatedly threw up with his face in the water and made loud gurgle noises, then cursed my name over and over again. That's when we finally had enough of watching them. I didn't see my brother or his 2 friends again until well into the afternoon. They were all badly hungover, and despite how much they drank, they couldn't forget that nasty beer they had the night before, especially since the bottles were littered all over the ground. My brother actually demanded I apologize, and I just laughed and said, "You actually want me to apologize to you for stealing beer from me?" And then we all started laughing at him. He left humiliated, and we didn't interact again. I drove home before he did this time, and he's not spoken about what happened to our parents, and I've heard nothing from mutual friends. I guess this time he wants to keep his humiliation a secret. I think next time I'll get some beer spiked with a laxative to leave for him. That might be funny. The next one is an entitled parent story. A very good friend of mine recently got on a plane with her 3 boys, 8, 9, and 10, by herself to visit Grandma for a month over summer vacation. I was on transport duty because driving to and from the airport is a young man's game, and also I love spending time with my homies. There was an accidental on-purpose scheduling issue. Namely, my friend wanted a day in a hotel to recuperate from the flight with her 3 boys before her mom starts driving her insane. Husband is coming up in a few weeks because he just started a new job and can't just be like, back in a month. So I snatch all 4 people and luggage from the airport and give them a lift to the hotel. All 3 boys are bouncing off the walls and my friend just needs a nap. So, hotel pool time. She's posted up under an umbrella and is dead to the world. I'm in the pool with the boys. We started off playing Marco Polo and then had to get creative once other folks were in the pool as well. Eventually, we settled on a game called Not Done Yet. Basically, I'm standing on one side of the steps out of the pool, and when the boys feel like it, they try and leave the pool. I decide if they're done or not yet using a complicated examination process that amounts to picking the kid up, giving them a bit of a shake, faking a big sniff, saying, "Not done yet," and yeeting them back into the pool. Obviously, if someone's waterlogged or actually wants out, I won't stop them, but typically there's giggling and a bit of a cue for inspection, so the game continues. I get a workout, they get tired out, everybody wins. Then a new player enters the playing field in the form of a very sweet-looking girl, approximately 6 years old, wearing water wings. She asks if she can play too. I say of course she can, but she needs to ask whoever is watching her first, so I know it's okay with everyone. She says, "Okay," and exits the pool. I'm keeping an eye on where she's going so I can smile and give the "I'm not a creep" wave to whoever's minding the kid. Only she doesn't run to one of the adults on the lounge chairs. She runs back into the hotel dripping wet. She disappears inside and comes back down about 5 minutes later and says, "Mommy says it's okay." Only she's not the type of kid who lies without batting an eye and is obviously fibbing. I ask if she really did, and the little girl says, well, Mommy was busy, so I think it's okay. It's at this point that the proverbial record scratches, and my inner monologue says, "What?" I summon the oldest of the boys from the waterborne shenanigans and ask him to go wake up his mom so she can keep an eye on things for a minute. I need to go take care of something. While he's bearding the dragon in her den, I crouch down and tell the little girl, "We need to go inside and find an adult because it's not okay that you're in the pool all by yourself, okay? You didn't do anything wrong, but you've got some growing to do before you can be in the pool all by yourself, okay?" At this point, the oldest homie has awoken the mom, and she's now looking at me with a "what the crap" look on her face. I mouth later at her, and then take the little girl's hand and bring her to the concierge desk of the hotel. I explain the situation with the little girl to the concierge, whose face goes from confusion to pained before giving the girl a smile and thanking me for bringing this to his attention. The concierge guy takes responsibility for the girl, and I go back out to the pool to explain what had happened to my friend. She was livid on the little girl's behalf, but mostly just wanted to resume her nap. Conveniently at that time, the middle homie had gotten out of the pool and was making faces at us while we were talking. I told my friend to get some sleep. I'll watch the boys. Then the middle homie got spear tackled back into the water because actions have consequences. Maybe 20 minutes to half an hour later, once I was starting to run out of steam, I sensed a disturbance in the force. A rather irate woman wearing a blouse that was inside out was dragging the little girl from before out to the pool area and demanding to know who told her she couldn't swim. The little girl, who was now silent with tears on her cheeks and a pathetically deflated water wing, pointed at me. I was instructed to get my ass out of the pool and explain myself. Why on earth was it so hard to watch an extra child while she got some adult time to herself? Why did I insist on ruining her first chance to get away from it all in months? Her little girl is an angel and is no trouble to watch, blah blah blah. I explained that it wasn't a good idea to leave a little one in a pool with no adult supervision, pointing to a number of signs about no lifeguard on duty, all children must be accompanied by an adult, etc., etc. The inside-out lady is getting steadily more belligerent, explaining like I'm slow that her daughter knows how to swim and was wearing floaties and would have been fine. She's getting more and more in my face, trying to act like I'm just the worst for ruining everything. And then player 3 enters the fight. It's my friend, and she's fresh out of fluffs to give. She starts reading Inside Out Lady the Riot Act, demanding to know how she could be so stupid and irresponsible, and how dare she try to act like I'm the bad guy here. Inside Out Lady opens her mouth to reply and just gets steamrolled. "Just look at your daughter, see what you've done?" Appeared to finally get through to the woman because she looks down at her daughter, then back up to my friend. There's a flicker of shame on her face, and then it's all rage, and she swung. I'm not ashamed to admit that stepping between those two without backup seemed like a poor life choice. I stopped the boys before they could get caught in the crossfire, told them to take a step back, and when several hotel employees came out to break up the fight, I stepped in. I grabbed my friend and pulled her back, while 2 guys from the hotel grabbed the other woman. The combatants are separated and the police are called. My friend and I are back at her lounge chair with a large first aid kit the hotel staff gave us while the boys hover and make sure Mom's okay. She's sporting a magnificent shiner from that first punch and a couple of other scrapes and bruises, but mostly seems livid that she got cold-clocked like that. The police arrive and get the story from everyone even tangentially involved. We wind up being asked to provide contact information to the police. My friend declines a check-over by an EMT saying she's fine, just sore. The story Inside Out Lady provided didn't match up at all with what the hotel cameras showed, and she got some shiny bracelets put on her before getting shoved in the back of a squad car. My friend said she would be delighted to press charges for assault, and was told the police would be in touch. Once the police were satisfied, it was definitely time to retreat to the hotel room. I got dressed and left for the evening after making sure everybody was okay, and on the way out I asked one of the front desk folks what happened with the woman and her daughter. The woman was arrested and the girl's father came to get her. They couldn't give me any more information than that. Hope she's okay. The next one is an entitled people story. As the sun set over the quiet neighborhood, tensions brewed between Karen, my entitled neighbor, and myself. Her audacity to repeatedly park her car in my driveway had reached its boiling point. Determined to reclaim what was rightfully mine, I devised a plan to outwit her. Little did I know this confrontation would escalate into a dangerous game of survival. With my husband away at work, I seized the opportunity to take action. Instead of confronting Karen directly, I decided to block my driveway with cement blocks whenever our car wasn't parked there. I hoped this would dissuade her from her selfish parking habits. Unfortunately, it only fueled her fury. One fateful day, I spotted Karen maneuvering her car, deliberately parking it in the middle of my front yard. Consumed by indignation, I rushed outside, my anger boiling over. Before she could step out of her vehicle, I confronted her, my voice laden with frustration. "Get your car off of my yard now!" I demanded, my words echoing through the tense air. Karen, unyielding in her entitlement, retorted, "This is what you get from blocking me from the driveway. You should let me park there." Infuriated, I responded, "The driveway belongs to me and my husband, not you." Defiantly, Karen proclaimed, "There is no way I am parking my car in the street when I can use your driveway. If you want to make things difficult, I will leave my car here." Frustration turned into resolve as I issued my final warning. "This is your last chance. If I see your car on my property again, I am calling to have it towed away. I refuse to play this game with you any longer." Enraged by my ultimatum, Karen started her car, appearing to acquiesce. However, as she reversed, she suddenly shifted gears, accelerating towards me. Instinctively, I leaped out of harm's way as her vehicle narrowly missed me. Shocked and trembling, I realized the extent of Karen's unhinged nature. She was willing to go to great lengths, even attempting to take my life, to assert her entitlement. Shaken, I immediately dialed my husband at work, his reassuring voice urging me to remain inside while he rushed home. In the brief period between Karen's vicious attack and my husband's arrival, she left a note by our door, a chilling reminder of her malevolence. The message threatened further harm if I dared to challenge her again. Fear gripped my heart, but as the next day dawned, I witnessed the audacity of Karen's actions. The cement blocks that once guarded my driveway had vanished, replaced by her car arrogantly occupying the space. Enough was enough. Determined to reclaim my peace, I made the difficult decision to have her car towed. An hour later, Karen arrived at my doorstep, accompanied by the police. She spewed false accusations, claiming she had rented the spot and that I had illegally towed her car. Desperate to defend my position, I pleaded with the officers to hear my side away from her vitriolic presence. Exhibiting the evidence, including the threatening note and the damaged grass from her attempt to run me over, I painted a clear picture of her escalating hostility. The police, recognizing Karen's baseless claims, arrested her to restore order and defuse the situation. Despite her relentless protests, justice prevailed. I felt a flicker of relief, knowing that the authorities understood the truth and sided with me. In the days that followed, Karen begrudgingly retrieved her car but found herself parking it on the street, defeated in her attempts to seize my driveway. News of her behavior spread, and even other neighbors refused to tolerate her audacious antics. Still, Karen persisted in defaming my character, attempting to tarnish my reputation at every turn. However, I chose to rise above her slander, knowing that those who believed her baseless lies were not worth my time nor my energy. Undoubtedly, Karen suffered a financial blow from retrieving her car, but she continued to blame me for her misfortune, hurling insults and claims of personal responsibility. I refused to engage her in further conflict, recognizing that her perception of reality would never align with mine. From that day forward, I remained vigilant, keeping a watchful eye on my driveway. If Karen ever dared to encroach upon my property again, I would swiftly summon the tow truck, ensuring she learned her lesson once and for all. No longer would I cower in the face of her entitlement. Instead, I would assert my rights and protect the tranquility of my home, standing strong against Karen's ceaseless attempts to disrupt my life. The next one is a pro-revenge story. I used to do construction work a few years ago and had the coolest manager ever, Thomas. Thomas had this next-door neighbor, Alan, who he couldn't stand. Alan would steal stuff from Thomas's yard, like gardening tools, lumber, and most importantly, dirt. Both Thomas and Alan had been growing vegetables in their backyards for years, and apparently, Alan had been stealing dirt from Thomas for years. Thomas, being a very non-confrontational guy, let it slide. One day at one of the job sites, they delivered a large amount of soil. You could climb those piles of soil. Thomas figured they wouldn't miss a few bucketfuls of dirt, and the general contractor on site didn't care either. So we started helping Thomas load up some buckets in the back of the truck. We loaded 8 buckets, and then he said to me, "Hold on, I need one more for Alan." I thought it was really nice of him to think about his neighbor. However, he was actually planning to leave the bucket out for Alan to steal instead of taking the dirt from his garden. That's when he told me about Alan and his thieving ways. Jokingly, I said, "You should take that tub of plant killer. I don't know what this stuff is called. You have, and pour it over the fence. Screw him and his garden. Unbeknownst to me, the wheels of justice started turning in Thomas's head. He didn't say anything to me, and we finished up the day and went home. About a week later, I showed up at Thomas's house for work. He runs the business from home, and he was grinning to himself the whole morning. Eventually, my curiosity got the better of me, and I had to know what was going on, so I asked him. He broke down his revenge plan step by step. He got home and unloaded his buckets of dirt in his driveway where Alan could see them. Then he proceeded to dump all of them, one by one where he needed them, but he intentionally forgot one bucket. This particular bucket was laced with plant killer. He emptied the entire bottle into the bucket and mixed it in. The best part is that Thomas didn't offer Alan the laced bucket, he just left it out. If Alan had asked for dirt, Thomas would have given him the regular stuff, but instead he chose to be sneaky. Under the cover of darkness, Thomas ran over, grabbed the bucket and took almost all of it, then put it back. After a week, Alan's tomatoes withered and died. So Thomas went to the nursery and bought new plants, but they didn't last more than 2 days before dying. He went back to the nursery, complained, and got more plants for free. A few days later, bam, they were dead again. Every morning, we checked on Alan and his radioactive dirt and quietly laughed to ourselves about what we now called Operation Scorched Earth. The next one is an entitled people story. Several years ago, my brother Dan moved from California to Washington State and built a 3-bedroom house on one of 2 parcels of land he had bought when he was 18 years old. He lived in a nice community with a small lake and had a homeowners association. During the 2008 economic crash, he ran into financial trouble, so we helped him. To repay us for the help, in March of 2016, he came down to California for an extended period to work on our house, which was neglected because of helping him. He was very proficient at renovating houses and did fantastic work. In November, my brother's friend Jake called him and asked if a friend of his, Tuna, could stay in one of the rooms for $400 per month. Dan had worked for many years with Jake doing construction for a house flipper, so he trusted Jake's judgment, needed the money, and thought it might be good to have someone trustworthy there to watch his house. Dan drove back up to Washington, cleaned out a room, put a lock on his bedroom door, locked the door, and put some of his things in a storage area up out of the way in the garage. Tuna seemed nice and gave Dan $400 for the first month. There was never a written rental agreement. It was just verbal and meant to be temporary because Dan was going to return in 6 months. Tuna never sent another payment. We would call and ask her, and she always said it had been sent, but nothing ever arrived. So what was going on at his house? We pieced together that something wrong was going on there after Dan's neighbor called and after questioning Jake. The neighbor complained that the house had turned into a drug house, full of people and cars coming and going all hours of the night. At the beginning of June 2017, Dan drove back to Washington and handed Tuna a 3-day eviction notice. She left, stating that she had somewhere else to live and would get her stuff later. He was allowing her to retrieve her stuff at a later date. He just wanted her out. He started working on repairs and cleaning up the house. I mailed Dan a care package with some clothes, a California-themed shopping bag, and gift cards for gas and food. 5 days later, Tuna showed up with 2 men who punched Dan in the face. They wanted to take the house back by force. Dan went to the neighbor and called the police. The police came, and instead of arresting the men and Tuna, they took Dan to jail for missing a child support court date, which then put a warrant on him. Before coming to California, he thought everything regarding child support back payments for his independent, successful 23-year-old adult child had been taken care of. He had no idea about a court date since they notify by mail, and Tuna had never forwarded his mail, which was one of the things she promised to do. The child support scam on Dan is another issue I will have to submit later. So the police essentially handed the house over to Tuna. She and her cronies went in, changed the locks, and placed a long metal bar across the inside of the garage door so it could not be opened from the outside. They stole the package I sent to Dan and spent the gift cards. Meanwhile, my family and I were on vacation in Hawaii, and I received a phone call from Dan in jail. I spent a whole day of my vacation in the hotel room trying to figure out how to get him out of jail. Bail bonds could not be used for child support cases. Finally, they let him out when I paid a child support payment of $350. He had been in jail for 3 days, and the squatters had dug themselves in, so when he returned to his house, he had to call the police to arrest them for trespassing. After all, Tuna had been evicted, left, and no longer had permission to be there. They were squatters by all accounts, but the state defers to people who just claim they are renting, therefore requiring a landlord to go through the court system to remove the so-called tenants, who are actually squatters. The police came and screwed him over once again. Tuna claimed she was renting the entire house, and the police believed her instead of Dan. She told the policeman that she would leave in 10 days, and the policeman told Dan that he could have his house back in 10 days because Tuna said she would leave by then. Are you kidding me? Dan was instructed to leave the premises or be arrested. It was his house. She was trespassing. He got into his minivan and drove away with nowhere to stay but in his van. Of course, Tuna did not leave after 10 days. Dan went back after 10 days and called the police again. Once again, the police told him to leave or be arrested. We didn't know what to do next. One of the Homeowners Association board members, who had some experience in managing real estate properties, attempted to help us. She said that he needed a 20-day eviction notice, then Tuna would be out, and this had always worked for her when she had to evict tenants. Okay, so the 20-day notice was posted, and we waited. Tuna did not leave. Dan went over to his house and started cleaning up trash strewn all over the yard, waiting for her to leave. Tuna called the police, stating that she was a renter and he was disturbing her. Once again, Dan was asked to leave or be arrested. This time, Dan put his phone on speaker and I heard the whole interaction between him and the police. Yes, he had to leave or be arrested. Dan could not even get his construction tools out of the garage and could not work without his tools. And with being homeless, how do you even work? What was going to happen to all of his possessions, his sentimental things? His room had been broken into long before, his things removed, and people had used the room. It was near the end of summer. We were paying his mortgage payments, and it was getting so hard on everyone. Then something nice happened. A kind friend, Adam, asked him to stay at his house, which Dan did. During this time, Dan worked for Adam with loaned tools, and also went to some landlord-tenant educational meetings. The people at the meetings were helpful and instructed Dan on how to proceed by taking the matter to court. The police would not go further without a court order to physically evict Tuna. It would be difficult to afford the cost to hire a lawyer, but eventually we did end up getting a lawyer. Dan posted a court appearance on the door of his house since Tuna never answered the door, and that is what you do legally in this case. Every time he posted a court appearance, he had to legally give her 1 week's notice, which he did. He showed up at court and Tuna failed to show up. So he won by default, right? Wrong. The judge said that Tuna was not given proper notice because the notice was posted by Dan instead of an anonymous person. Dan walked out of the courtroom. The lawyers from the landlord-tenant meetings were there and couldn't believe it. Unfortunately, Adam had to move out of the house he was renting, so Dan had to go back to living in his van. It was autumn in the Pacific Northwest, and it was getting cold. The police had started harassing him if he slept in his van. We rented motel rooms for Dan. Once while at a motel, Dan heard a knock on the door in the middle of the night. He thought it was the motel staff and opened the door. 2 men burst into the room and proceeded to beat the crap out of him to rob him. They broke his finger and gave him a concussion. Dan ran to his van, drove it to a parking lot, and slept. He refused to go back to the motel. Things were starting to go downhill in a very bad way. I found a lawyer from a non-profit who worked for free to help. He actually used that 3-day eviction notice that Dan had given Tuna back in June as a basis for the case. I had found it online, the wording was appropriate, and it had been served properly. The lawyer had to jump through endless hoops and court appearances. The same judge presided over every case that had to do with evictions, and she always favored the tenants, including entitled ones. This took forever, like 3 more months, and Dan became haggard, homeless, sick, depressed, and at times had gone missing. Once I called every hospital, jail, homeless shelter, and even the food bank looking for him. His van was impounded 4 times. He was hospitalized 4 times. He was endlessly hunted down and harassed by the police. 3 times I found him because I was listed as his emergency contact on his state insurance when he showed up at hospitals. While all of this was happening to Dan, my husband was in a serious motorcycle accident, and I had to take care of my husband, changing his dressings, etc. Okay, I'm crying right now. This was so hard to endure, remember, and difficult to write about. I couldn't leave and fly up to Washington to help my brother, but I was doing everything down here to get his house back with the lawyer. I got him motel rooms at other motels when I could. I paid 4 times to get his van out of impound. I sent him cell phones and care packages delivered at UPS stores. One time, Dan was lost and didn't have his van or phone. He ended up at a hospital that contacted me. He told me that he had felt really sick and had gone to the hospital earlier, who released him after examining him, even after he pleaded with them to let him stay because he felt horribly sick. He ended up collapsed on the sidewalk by the Salvation Army shelter, who wouldn't let him in, and another homeless person called 911. So he was back at that hospital with a very serious condition affecting his heart. I told the hospital to please call me at release time so I could arrange a motel for Dan. They didn't. He was then found in a park in frigid weather dressed in a pair of scrubs, a t-shirt, hoodie, and one shoe. A city policeman called me and took him to a motel where he stayed a while. I sent a care package there. Dan told me that one time when he was being harassed by the police for cooking food in a park, he mouthed off and told them they were communists, and it was their fault that he was homeless because they gave his house to a squatter. A fire truck arrived, so he was not arrested with the firemen there, but I don't think the police liked him much for saying that. In October, Dan was arrested for drunk driving while he was sleeping in a Walmart parking lot. I had to bail him out of jail over that. Every time he didn't get to court hearings, they would post warrants for his arrest. One time he was in jail, and they refused to give him his medication, so I had to bail him out because he felt so awful. In mid-November, the police arrested Dan again for not showing up to court for that so-called drunk driving incident. He begged me to bail him out. Even though the bail bondsman paid the bail in the late afternoon, the jail released him in the middle of the night, again with no vehicle impounded, a dead cell phone, no charger in the van, no money, etc. I found out later that this jail only releases people at night so they can get credit and are paid by the state for the whole day. That night he was released, it was our deceased mother's birthday. Dan was then found unconscious in a ditch by a seawall in a Starbucks parking lot. He had a broken femur, broken hip, cracked spine, a head contusion, and that finger was still broken from the motel incident. The doctors evaluated that he had been hit in the back of his head with a blunt object. We do not know who did it. The last thing he remembers was a police car driving by. He was airlifted to a major hospital in Seattle, about 50 miles from where he was. I took a flight up to Seattle as soon as I could and visited him. The doctor showed me the x-rays, and he had countless rods and pins put into his body to put him back together. By this time, we were getting closer to having his house back. I went by the house with Adam's brother-in-law, Paul, who was packing heat. We pounded on the door, and I demanded that the squatters hand over my dead mother's rocking chair. The stupid friend Jake was there, and he handed it through the door. It is a big heirloom mission-style chair, and they had burned into the chair in 4-inch letters the word wasted. The court order finally became available, but then we had to schedule the eviction according to when the police had time to do it, which was another 2 weeks. It was scheduled for the beginning of December. I went back home to California briefly and returned the night of the eviction. Dan was in the hospital for almost 2 weeks. When he was released, I arranged a nice long-term stay-type hotel back near home for him to live at until the police evicted the squatters. Paul helped us a lot. He was with the police at the eviction, changed all the locks, and secured the house. He picked up Dan at the hotel, and Dan got to witness the eviction of that entitled idiot from hell. She was the only one left in the house. A notice had been posted on the door to warn everyone to leave, but as usual, she didn't think there would be any reason she would have to leave. It took her completely by surprise. The police pounded on the door and demanded she leave immediately. She asked if she could get this and that, but no, she couldn't. She grabbed her little dog, purse, and left with nothing else. The police put a notice on the door after Paul secured everything. Dan was driven back to the hotel, and then I arrived. I wish I could have seen the eviction, but couldn't get a flight early enough. The neighbor said that a bunch of people came to the house that night pounding on the door trying to get in, but couldn't. They almost called the police, but the people left. We went over there every day for about a week to clean up. Dan was confined to a wheelchair and was on heavy meds, so it was hard. He couldn't help too much, but did his best. The house was a disaster. There were literally 5 tons of garbage in the yards around the house. The trash disposal service was not activated during this time, so they just piled it up around the house. On one side of the house was a huge pillar of trash made out of wire fencing. It was about 8 feet by 8 feet and at least 12 feet high. The front yard was awful, with several piles of trash about 4 feet high. Tuna left every single thing in the kitchen, in the cupboards, and rotting food in pans. The carpets were soaked in dog pee. There were clothes and junk everywhere. There was loads of crushed glass embedded into the gravel driveway like she wanted us to get flat tires. Over the doorway from the house into the garage was a dangerous booby trap, which literally could have killed someone. It was made out of large, heavy metal clamps with a glass jewelry case teetering on top of the clamps. It could have fallen on top of someone's head if not discovered, and someone jarred it a little. The water had been shut off for months by the homeowners association, because they controlled the well and owned the water system. As soon as you don't pay the homeowners association fees, water is shut off. All the toilets were clogged up with crap. The sewage system was impossible to unclog, and later DB discovered that they had thrown dirt and plastic containers down the pipes. He had to go under the house and disassemble the pipes to get everything out. Hanging up on the wall in plain sight in the master bedroom was the California shopping bag I had mailed to Dan in the package that Tuna had stolen. She hung it there to taunt me. I am not super religious, but I felt the worst kind of evil there and had to pray and debunk the evil spirits from that house. I stayed for weeks there cleaning up and hired some people to do yard cleanup to get the front yard clean. Later, Dan and Adam dealt with the pillar of trash at the side of the house. Every construction tool that belonged to Dan was stolen. He couldn't work much from a wheelchair, but needed the tools to repair his own house. Dan persisted, though. He finally got to the point where he could walk. Now he can't walk for long periods, gets tired easily, but can do things slowly. He has some nice roommates that drive him places and take care of him at times. Many of his tools have been replaced. He sanded off the wasted message on Mom's rocking chair. We have sunk a lot of money into helping him, but what else is one supposed to do? It was a life or death situation. That was his house he had built so many years ago. This was the most wicked thing I have ever encountered. It was coming from all directions. We heard that the creepy squatter died a year later. No one wanted to take her in, and she went from person to person staying wherever. If she would have been decent and kind, she probably could have been a roommate and had a place. But she thought she could just take someone's house. The next one is an entitled people story. It's been 2 long years since the devastating fire destroyed our home, and the scars of that experience still linger in my memory. The once cozy haven that my wife and I cherished was reduced to rubble and ash, leaving us with only painful reminders of what was lost. However, with insurance on our side, we embarked on the daunting task of rebuilding our lives from scratch. In the aftermath of the fire, we realized that living under the scrutiny of a homeowners association was not the paradise we once believed it to be. Our previous optimism shattered as we encountered obstacle after obstacle. The homeowners association, in all its glory, decided to make our lives even more difficult by contesting our plans to rebuild our home. Their claim? Our proposed design violated their precious bylaws and was not pretty enough to fit the neighborhood's outdated aesthetic. Our desire to create a more modern and functional home clashed with the homeowners association's rigid adherence to the past. We wanted an upgraded kitchen, a contemporary central air system, and a floor plan that reflected our personal style. Yet, the homeowners association insisted that we conform to the architectural norms of the 1930s when the neighborhood was established. Despite our attempts to compromise, our blueprints were repeatedly rejected without any clear justification. Countless meetings, compromises, and redesigns followed, as we desperately tried to appease the homeowners association's stubborn demands. We abandoned unique roof shapes and innovative fireplace designs, opting instead for a watered-down version of our original vision. Still, they were unyielding, claiming that the interior changes were too modern for the neighborhood's character. A year passed and frustration consumed our spirits. The homeowners association's relentless opposition left us feeling hopeless. They even went as far as threatening legal action, accusing us of violating their code and devaluing the entire community. Faced with mounting debts and the constant fear of a lawsuit, we resorted to hiring a lawyer to protect our rights and navigate this bureaucratic nightmare. Finally, the decisive day arrived, the day our lawyer faced off against the homeowners association representative in a crucial meeting. As our advocate presented our case, it was clear that our lawyer's prowess far exceeded that of our opponents. The logic and reason behind our arguments resonated with the homeowners association, and they finally relented. Our most recent blueprint, albeit with compromises, was approved, marking a significant victory in our battle against the homeowners association. With cautious optimism, we began construction on our new home. The design might not be as avant-garde as we had initially envisioned, but it bore the stamp of our resilience and determination. We focused on the positives: a charming porch, a soaring ceiling with an elegant chandelier that would infuse our rebuilt house with a touch of our personalities. Now, on the cusp of moving into our newly constructed abode, we can finally breathe a sigh of relief. The harrowing journey has taught us the immense power wielded by Homeowners Association S and the dire need for accountability. As we prepare to step into our restored sanctuary, I can't help but feel a mix of satisfaction and caution. The battle might be won, but the war against overbearing Homeowners Association S continues. The next one is a pro-revenge story. About 5 years ago, I bought a 1,500 square feet townhome condo in an up-and-coming town right in the downtown area. This is a valuable property, with home prices having increased 35% since I purchased it. It was a wonderful area within walking distance of everything I loved as a single bachelor. When I moved in, all my neighbors were wonderful, except for one person. She belonged to the Homeowners Association board but was moving on because you can only serve 8 years. Let's call her Gimpy J. Gimpy J is a 65-plus-year-old widow whose husband died unexpectedly from a heart attack. She doesn't have much to do. She met a man online and moved on, and I was happy for her. Talking to my passive neighbors, I heard bits and pieces of why things were problematic at the Homeowners Association because of Gimpy J and another woman who had to move because of age. On the board, the two of them bullied residents. They changed the landscaping from mulch to pine needles, stopped upkeep on the pool deck because they hated kids, and reported one house for anything and everything because their kids were too loud. Gimpy J even bullied a woman with MS because she was feeding feral cats and attracting raccoons and possums near our homes, leading to a call to animal control. Residents did not like her. I got married and my wife has been living with me for 2 years now. We are very happy. During this time, Gimpy J began spending more and more time with her new boyfriend, who lives about an hour away from our house in the country. She initially spent the weekend there, then a week, until she began living there all the time with very little time spent at our complex, maybe 15 minutes to 2 hours a month. Now, in our complex, there is only one rule on parking. Each resident is entitled to 2 spots close to their building, but not necessarily in front of their unit, and there is no limit to the parking spots you may occupy. The key word here is close. We have new folks on the board who are all under 40 years of age, and the place is starting to get spruced up. We have friends over regularly, and they park in front of our unit. Gimpy J had 2 hip replacements done, and we had not seen her in about 7 months. In our little area of the complex, there are 8 townhomes that face each other, 4 on one side and 4 on the other. There are 8 spots for 3 homes, and a handicapped spot for one of our neighbors. Gimpy J started coming back around in January for longer periods, a day on the weekend to go out downtown or to visit friends. She started complaining that we were in her spots. Again, there are no assigned spots. We were willing to move our friends' vehicles for her to another empty spot. That is, until she started occupying 2 spots at a time with her vehicle. This behavior continued, as she would come in taking 2 spots any time she was here. The rules in the master deed say no vehicle can take more than 1 spot without written permission from the board of directors or property management group, and it cannot continue for more than 2 days with permission. This rule was meant to account for residents moving in and out. Suddenly, that spring, my wife had a medical issue and was hospitalized for 4 days and on disability for 8 weeks. My mom was the only family member on both sides who had the capability of coming down to where we lived to help us out. She drove down, and we needed to occupy 3 spots. I promptly let our property management company know, and the board of directors know what was happening, providing them with my mom's make, model, and plate number, and that she would be here 6, 8 weeks, just in case anyone had an issue. Gimpy J's first time home in 6 weeks, we had a car in front of her house, but she had room for her vehicle. She marched over and banged, and I mean it was loud on the door, demanding we move the car and tried to open my front door and walk into my home. Yes, she tried to enter my home. It shook my dog who peed herself, it was that loud, and who in turn growled and chased her out. I promptly told her there was no assigned parking and the rule is 1 car, 1 spot. We would move a car out of respect one last time, and then we saw that she occupied 2 spots with her car as usual. The next time it happened, 2 weeks later, we refused to move our vehicle. We also began taking pictures for our records and communicating with our homeowners association about Gimpy J's erratic behavior. She continued to arrive, bang on our door, and scream at us for having a car parked in her spot. One time, while banging on the door, she dented the frame with her keys. A few more times when we were not home, she would come in and park, occupying 2 spots. I took more pictures for my records in case something happened because of her erratic behavior. Finally, it happened. About this time last year, I was at the gym, and I got a call from my mom and my wife, frantic that someone is going to tow my wife's car. I drove home as fast as I could, and it was Gimpy J's boyfriend's son and his girlfriend, whom we had never met. This person, who doesn't live here and has no business here, is screaming at us and insulting my pregnant wife and mother. My mother-in-law pays X dollars a month for these spots. You duckers are breaking the rules. Imma tow that SUV. All while drinking beer. Now we know he can't do anything except scream and try to intimidate us outside. He calls his mother-in-law, who is not married to his father, about the situation. Gimpy J drives an hour to our complex. When she gets here, she parks her car behind all three of ours and gets out, blocking us in, and I had enough. I quickly snapped some pictures. I called the police. I will not feel unsafe or be harassed in my neighborhood by people who do not live there, or are barely there. Gimpy J realizes I called the police and moves her car. I print out all my documentation, pictures, and communication from the Homeowners Association. I quickly shower because I'm disgusting from the gym and throw on a nice polo shirt and shorts. My pregnant wife sits in her rocking chair, and my mother sits calmly at the kitchen table. The police arrive, and we can see them hollering, waving their arms widely, and screaming. The police come to the door, and we kindly open up. Gimpy J tries to walk in before I block her and ask her to leave my property, and I invite the police officers inside. We apologize that we even have to call them over something so petty, but our neighbor is acting crazy, and her behavior has been escalating. We explain what is happening, show them communication from the Homeowners Association, and show them pictures. The officer quickly had enough of these individuals. He imposes a no trespass order on my porch and will not let her near my property. If she steps foot on our walkway, she is in violation of the order and will be arrested. We watch him go back out and explain calmly to her, and she starts screaming along with her boyfriend's kid and his girlfriend. This goes on for a while, and the officer calls for backup, and a second car arrives promptly. Gimpy J promptly declares it's her property too, as she pays her fees and claims he can't do that because everything is community property outside of a home. She marches up to my stoop and he arrests her, charging her with disorderly conduct and harassment. The police then tell Gimpy J's boyfriend's son to go home. He gets in his truck with his girlfriend and they drive off. As soon as he hits the road outside of our complex, the second police officer pulls him over for DUI. That's right, the drunk guy screaming at my wife and mother had been drinking the entire time and was intoxicated. The police couldn't do anything in the complex but could when he hit the main road. Both of them were hauled off to jail, and we stopped hearing from them about parking. 2 days later, Gimpy J and her boyfriend show up to the complex and park her boyfriend's car in our lot and leave it parked in one spot to ensure it's hers. Well, they drive off, and we don't hear from them for a week, and no one is home. Since Gimpy J's boyfriend does not live here and his car is abandoned, I called the Homeowners Association to report it. They came and towed his SUV. Gimpy J put her house on the market 8 weeks later. The next one is a petty revenge story. My daughter, 19F, had a group of high school friends for years. Fast forward to her freshman year of college, and her new roommate becomes part of the friend group. I was diagnosed with stage 3 cancer the same day she started classes that year. As the year goes on, her relationship with some of these friends starts to have problems, but the roommate still seems solid, so they sign a lease for sophomore year. By the beginning of sophomore year, all of her high school friends, 4, have turned on my daughter, and she's struggling to figure out why. By the end of September, she finds out the roommate has been playing both sides of the fence and has ultimately sided with my daughter's old friends and continues to see them regularly. This, of course, creates a nasty living situation for my daughter, but she does her best to manage through. As time goes on, I come to find out that her friends turned on her because they felt that her emotional needs were toxic for them to be around. My daughter was having panic attacks about my cancer and other normal things, and was reaching out to her friends for someone to talk to, but they couldn't handle it. A few weeks ago, the roommate invited 2 of these friends to stay over. My daughter asked that they pick another time, as she had work and then an all-nighter ahead of her to finish her finals, and she didn't want to be in the apartment if they were going to be there. The roommate ignored this request. My daughter walked in on them being there after work and had a panic attack. The roommate looked at her and said, "See, this is why you have no friends when you behave like this. What do you expect?" This week, my daughter managed to find a way to move out before the roommate came back from break. The couch, the coffee table, the rug, the pots and pans, the dishes, the shower curtain, and so on. All of it was my daughter's. The internet, the electricity, the water, all in my daughter's name. She took everything, moved out, and left the roommate to come back from break with none of it working, and all of the shared space items gone. And she left her a note signed, "What did you expect?" Oh, I wish I could be a fly on the wall when she walks in. Update. My daughter received a text from one girl in the group, not the roommate, asking if they can talk to her about bringing some of the stuff back, as the roommate was thinking of calling the cops. My daughter simply said, "No, I only took my stuff, so go ahead and call the cops, but don't ever text me again." So not much of an update, but at least we know that revenge was definitely served. The next one is an entitled People Story, so this happened many years ago, sometime after I got my first major contract. My shop had to expand quickly to meet the needs of the contract, so I hired several people based more on qualifications than personality. I also failed to do proper background checks. Very important. Don't be dumb like me. This would prove to be a major misstep on my behalf. I hired a couple of older gentlemen who had shoes older than me. Great group of guys for the most part. One guy I hired will be forever burned into my brain, and is why I am very careful about who I hire nowadays. The guy named Doug, yeah, Doug can bite one, came to me with over 20 years of experience and every certification needed for the job. Doug told me he was let go from his previous job because of downsizing. I didn't care what the reason was, I needed people. I hired Doug, and at first he was great. He didn't start showing his true colors until about a month after being hired. The first thing was him being caught in the men's room pleasuring himself. He also never closed the stall door, claimed he was claustrophobic. The next day, he was rubbing his pants while looking at a Victoria's Secret catalog. I told him to cut it out but enter the wrench. During this time, a union stepped in and my shop unionized. We eventually came to terms on a lot of stuff, but at first it was very rough. They felt that I was being unfair to Doug. I backed off and Doug got worse. He started walking around touching some of the mechanics. Eventually, the union and I came to an agreement that Doug has got to go. We sat him down and I handed him his last check. What was to follow I was shocked about and will never forget. Doug pulled his pants down and told us all to suck it. His language was far worse. I just can't bring myself to type that. It is burned into my brain what he did say, and it would make a porn star blush. He walked out with his pants down, yelling at everyone. I paid for a tow truck flatbed to move his toolbox to his house and thought it was over. Enter his revenge. The next day, he entered the employee parking lot and took a crowbar to every car. When one of the guys went to confront him, he pulled out a plastic gun. We all thought the gun was real and called the police. He finished smashing every windshield and drove off. Back then, I didn't have security cameras, so thankfully one of the guys recorded him. The police caught up with him and arrested him. He got a bunch of charges that I can't remember half of them, but I know he was charged with vandalism and threatening with a firearm. Now, if I were to run a background check on him before hiring him, I would have found out that he was on the sex offender list and had a record. And though background checks are often vague if they have anything at all, I would have known not to hire this guy. After that day, I installed security cameras, and I started performing background checks. Don't be dumb like me. The next one is an entitled parent story. This one's a sad story all around, but it primarily revolves around two kids with very sad stories. Worth noting, the people I was celebrating this Labor Day with have a very it-takes-a-village approach to child minding. An adult is left in charge of a little one, and if the little one and the adult part ways, the adult makes sure a different adult has charge of the kid. Leads to some interesting situations where a kid is MIA, but we've never actually lost track of one and have a 100% safety rate. Well, aside from trips and falls and scrapes, but that's just the price of doing business when you're little. The first kid is Max. He's 5 and was put in sole custody of his dad after his mom was arrested. He wears a diaper still due to the trauma he suffered, and his dad feels like he failed him and, as a result, seems to be incapable of disciplining the kid. It's been 2.5 years now, and people watch Max like a hawk because he can't be trusted near animals or with other people's things. When caught, he turns on the waterworks and his dad doesn't do anything. The second kid is Alicia, and she's 4 and was adopted by a pair of my friends. She's got a speech impediment that her bio parents tried to solve by beating it out of her. When we first met her, everyone was given firm instructions, no using the R word in her presence at all, for any reason. Second rule, if she feels comfortable enough to speak to you, you listen. Period. Third rule, no surprise hugs, no fist bumps, no high fives. If she's having a good day, low fives are allowed. If she gets triggered, she just shuts down, doesn't cry, doesn't do anything, doesn't respond to outside stimuli. She just goes away, and it is the saddest thing to see. Sweetest little kid, though. Her smile lights up the whole room when it comes out. On to the events. Alicia has just hit her Y phase a few years late for obvious reasons, and she'd asked me why she gets shocked by doorknobs while running around in stocking feet. I happen to rather enjoy these questions, and I was in the middle of a talk with her about why that is. She was speaking when Max and his dad arrived. I was down on my haunches and listening very closely when Max runs up and just shoves Alicia to the ground and says, "Shut up, Weetod! Uncle OP, my iPad is broken, can you fix it?" brandishing a tablet at me. I won't lie to you and say it wasn't a struggle to keep my voice even, but I knew yelling would only make things worse for Alicia. "Excuse you? I'm not fixing a thing until you apologize to Alicia and wait your turn." "But Uncle OP, my tablet!" "Apologize and then wait your turn." "No!" "Then stop calling me uncle and find someone else to fix it. Bullies don't get my help and they certainly don't get to call me uncle." Poor Alicia was just lying where she fell, not even crying. Hadn't sat up, just looked like a robot that had run out of batteries. I scooped her up and told Max, "You stay right here while I find Alicia's mom. This conversation isn't over." He just starts screaming, "No bully, no bully." I snuck inside the house with Alicia where it was quieter for a moment and said, "Alicia, I know you're scared right now, but I need to tell you a secret. Can you nod if you can hear me right now? This is very important." I got the tiniest little nod and I told her, "Max has the exact same problem talking that you do, and I understand you much better. You can't tell anyone I told you that though, okay?" Bless her little heart. She actually whispered, "Really?" "Of course. Would I lie to you?" Tiny shake of the head. I tracked down her mom outside and gave her the Cliff Notes version of what went down. Mom looked like she wanted to rend Max limb from limb, but I told her the plan. She was appeased. They went someplace quiet so Alicia could come out of her shell, and I went back to where I'd left Max. Max was being held by his dad, and his dad was asking Max what had happened to his tablet, and he was just repeating, "No bully." Apparently, after I'd left, Max had smashed his tablet on the ground, and his dad had no idea what happened. I raised my voice a little so people would pay attention, and asked Max to repeat what he'd said to Alicia. He shook his head and started crying, still shouting, "No bully," and sobbing hysterically. When I relayed the exact events that happened, his dad had the grace to look ashamed. "Come on, OP, you know what he went through? Can't we cut him a break? He doesn't know any better." This is the canned response anytime Max is caught doing something like kicking a dog or stealing a toy or phone to play with. I was done. Further discussion ensued that I won't bother relaying, but Max's dad refused to do anything to actually discipline his child, just like every other time Max acts out. But this time we were done. This is so far across the line from acceptable, it boggles the imagination. We were planning on doing campfire s'mores after dinner, but I called an audible. The new plan is putt-putt golf and then ice cream, and whoever does the best at putt-putt gets the biggest, bestest ice cream the place has. Every single adult agreed Max and Max's dad shouldn't come with. They got to stay home and think about what they'd done. Miraculously, her recorded scores for putt-putt were 18 hole-in-ones, and listening to her laugh while she tried to contend with an ice cream that was very nearly as big as she was made everyone's night. Max and his dad were gone by the time we got back. I hope his dad gets his act together. Thank you for watching. I would really appreciate it if you could like the video and subscribe to our channel if you haven't already. We'll see you again tomorrow.